Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. Food security is a big challenge today. What is the solution? That question is being asked at the ongoing World Trade Organization's 12th Ministerial Conference. Well, the reasons for food security is varied. For example, the Russian-Ukraine war, the pandemic, and the climate change. There are things that can be done to make the world less vulnerable. One of the biggest examples is coming from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO. It has made an urgent call for the transformation of agri-food systems to make them more efficient, resilient, and sustainable. Meanwhile, helping the rural people is a key. An estimated 3.4 billion people, around 45%, of the global population live in the rural areas of developing countries. And that is the start point of IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So how to make sure the rural people, particularly from the global south, are going to live free from hunger and poverty? That is the key for the work of IFAD. On that, Matteo Marchisio, who is the China Country Director and representative of IFAD, has a lot to share. He's been serving in China for 8 years. I have this conversation with him right before his departure. Matteo Marchisio, what a pleasure to see you.
My pleasure. Can't wait.
Congratulations for a very successful term. I know your bond with China dated back to earlier generation. Maybe many of our audience will not know. Tell me more about how did you learn about China as a child?
Well, not many knows that, as a matter of fact, I'm a quarter Chinese. My grandmother was born in Tianjin in early 1900 and met my grandfather in Tianjin. Tianjin had an Italian commercial concession, and my grandfather was an official Navy over there. But the interesting story is that, as a matter of fact, my great-grandfather, so the father of my grandmother, was one of the first 100 Chinese kids that was sent to the US in late 1800 to study English and to study the Western cultures, with the idea of returning to China and supporting the government to modernize. And as a matter of fact, my great-grandfather was the founder of Tianjin University.
Tell me more about the role of China transforming over the years from one benefiter of IFAD to one of the supporters of IFAD, and now one of the most important pillars of support for IFAD.
I feel very fortunate because I served in China over the past 8 years, since 2014. Yeah. 2014 was the second year of President Xi Jinping. It was precisely when Xi Jinping launched his battle towards eradicating poverty. So I lived basically my 8 years here in China, witnessing the incredible efforts and achievements of the government of China in bringing the remaining millions of people out of poverty. And it has been
so how did you observe that process?
8 years in China is probably equivalent to 20 years anywhere else. I recall the first field visits in 2014. I was still visiting remote villages that lacked road access, were not connected to electricity, were lacking water and sanitations. And just in a few years, returning to the same village, I could see incredible progress. But the most interesting part of that, and it's very difficult to describe because it's very intangible, is the attitude of people. When I start working here, people were somehow passive towards their future. The last few years, by interviewing our beneficiaries, I noticed a degree of optimism, a confidence in the future. And this is, although intangible, is simply the result of progress and development.
Poverty eradication, extreme poverty eradication is an important task in China. And yet, with the economic situation changing and the pandemic, many are wondering whether there is the huge danger of some of those whose extreme poverty has been eradicated over the past few years, so would had to go back to earlier poverty. Now, how much do you see China is doing and thinking about this? What do you think are some of the measures that could be most useful at this moment?
No, very appropriate question. As a matter of fact, poverty is not a static process. Poverty eradication is not a static process. It's not that once you're out of poverty, you are out of poverty forever. The risk of falling back in poverty are from anywhere. I mean, we experienced COVID, which was an expected event and put under pressure those that were more vulnerable. But any shock could have potentially put the same people under the same stress. Imagine a sudden drop in the price of commodities, or a bad harvest due to climate change. So I think that we should always remember, the government does it, that achieving poverty is important, but keeping people out of poverty is more important. And this is a critical pillar of the rural revitalization strategy, that the new development paradigm of the government of China. The rural revitalization strategy does not only aim at economically developing the rural areas. It also aims at keeping those that were lifted out of poverty out of poverty.
But Matteo, this is the key issue here: how to make sure the local community has the energy and the know-how and the capability of keep themselves out of poverty. Another thing is the international environment is changing, as we said, and China's role is also evolving. So at this critical juncture, how do you see those ordinary people who just came out of extreme poverty be able to hold on to their own fate?
Absolutely. I mean, the recipe is relatively simple. I mean, you need to create opportunities in rural areas so that people have a reliable income and a sufficient safety net to resist to shocks.
Tell me more about some examples you have witnessed or you are working together with China.
Absolutely. An example is access to finance. One of the reasons why poor people have difficulties in developing economically is that they lack the access to financial resources to start their own business or to buy assets that would improve their livelihoods. So providing access to financial resources, insurance, and I've seen incredible examples of how digital technologies can help that process.
We earlier see the Chinese practices, and mainly it is a useful example or practice for the developing countries. How relevant are these experiences and the current practices and even struggles relevant to the rest of the developing country and South-South cooperation?
On the one hand, you're absolutely right. I mean, the experience that China, the experience and the lessons, because in the process of developing, China went through ups and downs. So the experience in developing rural areas can be extremely useful to other countries that are a few years back along the same development path. Transfer of technologies. A good examples that I often quote, but it's not the only one, is that of biogas digesters. This was a technology that IFAD, together with the government of China, introduced in some rural areas in Guangxi. Most importantly, IFAD learning from the positive experience in China, start introducing the same technologies in other countries in Africa and Asia. So that's an example of South-South cooperation. But what I mentioned as a second element that to me is even more relevant is that China, to a certain extent, showed the world that ending poverty, ending extreme poverty is possible. It's a message of hope, if you want. Other countries have the concrete example that this is possible. And this, to me, a very powerful message to the world.
China is working on the rural revitalization. For IFAD, where do you think the opportunities are for cooperation with China on that? And that might have a huge impact, positive impact for the developing world.
The rural revitalization strategy is a very comprehensive strategy. I think that that's the right approach. I mean, you cannot promote rural development simply looking at the economics or simply looking at the environment or without taking into consideration the governance. In my view, an important message for China is that you need to invest in your rural areas. You give opportunities to the people in rural areas to remain in rural areas if they want to. At the moment, they do not have choices. Many of the beneficiaries that I interview and that are forced to migrate in rural area, in urban areas for a period of the year, because to search for a job, would rather prefer to earn a bit less and stay in rural areas if they had the opportunity. This is this is something that we should take into consideration, and we should promote, give them the opportunity to stay in rural areas. Agriculture is not the only sector that can help China achieving that. There is a limit in the agriculture sector on the amount of additional work that can be provided in rural sectors. China has the opportunity to develop additional sectors in rural areas, tourism, services, digital economy has plenty of opportunities. Those are the sectors that can really help rural areas in China to be developed, and that's where investment should go.
IFAD just celebrated the 40 years anniversary of China-IFAD cooperation. Congratulations on that. And for you also, this is almost the end of your term, even though I know you're still running around the country. People come and people go when you are working for an international organization in a city, in a country. But what is there for you to take away with?
People, international civil servants comes and go. I would leave China, but I will always remain a friend of China. My understanding of China will help me to understand better the world, how it is and how it could evolve. Life is full of surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years I come back to China.
Matteo, what a pleasure to see you once again for this interview. I saw your colleague already waiting at the gate to drag you to another appointment before you leave China. So wonderful to see you. All the best.